Yeah, we're live. 7:10. Just a little bit, couple of minutes late. That's okay. Tonight we want to talk about dual plane EFI manifolds. We've covered this before on other live feeds, but I was thinking about this today quite a bit, and while I was out working, and I started to question it. I know that there are some applications available. I think somebody said Hughes, or one of the guys has one for like 340, 360, 318 Mopar stuff, I think, which is good to have because the Kager options are kind of limited for Magnum stuff. So, that's probably good. But it got me thinking, yeah, that's a dual plane manifold, particularly, if we back up a little bit off of the EFI part of it, if we take a look from a carbureted standpoint, the vast majority of motors that guys are running around with on the street, particularly when they were running carbureted stuff way back in the day, and they're still doing it now, the vast majority of them should have a dual plane on it. And it's really, really hard to go wrong with something like an RPM air gap. The Edelbrock version, or there's other copies out there, I think, probably for a lot of the different applications. The one I'm showing in the thumbnail is a big block Chevy. But we see from the EFI standpoint, we see these, we have lots of dedicated EFI intake manifolds for a variety of applications, LS stuff and big blocks and small blocks and stuff. A lot of them, in fact, most of them nowadays have factory EFI intake manifolds. But then also other of the more popular engine families also have aftermarket intake manifolds. 5-liter Ford's a good example. LS, big block Chevy, certainly small block Chevy, to a lesser extent than the Dodge guys. But if we look at just the carbureted stuff, up to about 6,500 RPM or so, more on smaller displacement motors, a dual plane intake manifold, at least as compared to a single plane intake manifold in carbureted form, we always see this crossover. The single plane might be better at the very top. The dual plane is usually better for, let's face it, most of the curve. So that's why it's so popular. That's why people choose it. And especially if you wanted to, if it doesn't cross over quite where you want it to, like you want more top end power, let's say, for whatever reason, you just put an open spacer on it. And that tends to shift the power up a little bit, and you get to make more power, so that you would change the crossover point between a typical single plane and a dual plane in carbureted form. The question then becomes, okay, well, and a lot of applications, a lot of the aftermarket guys, Edelbrock and other intake manifolds, intake manufacturers have gone out of their way to make what we would call converted EFI intake manifolds. So there are dedicated EFI intake manifolds, typically long runner stuff, fast manifolds for LSs. But if we look at the carbureted stuff, a lot of guys have gone to the trouble of making single plane intake manifolds and converting them to port injection. So they've done this by either welding or casting, provisions for intake manifolds. So, and then you usually make a mount for the rail, and then they put the injectors in. So if you have these provisions for these injector bungs, and then you have, mounts welded to it, or as I said, cast into it and the machined into it. If the manifold's already cast to accept injectors, and then also has a casting that you drill and tap holes for to mount the rails, and a rail assembly, an L bracket or whatever it is for the rail, then you're all set. And this is most common on single plane intake manifolds. I've been told by manufacturers of these intake manifolds that you can't do a dual plane. Now, I know that that's not true, because there's nothing stopping you from doing a dual plane. There might be logistic hurdles that you have to overcome, only because usually on single plane manifolds, they're at least the same level, the runner's end going into the head in the same position. On dual planes, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they're staggered a bit. So and what that does is when you're going to put injectors on there, the injectors might be at a little different height or whatever. And so it's not an insurmountable thing. You could even make a rail that's not a straight rail. So you can overcome this stuff. It's not like I said, not insurmountable. It's not a big problem. So that can be done. And so we would like to see, at first, my opinion was we'd like to see more of that. If I look at the Magnum one, okay, they have a kegger. I saw a single plane manifold that you could use as converted, but neither one of those are good choices. In my opinion, for most street applications, those are to the two extremes. The kegger manifold, even a modified version of the kegger manifold, is a low RPM manifold. A single plane for most 318, 340, and certainly the 318, 340, 360 is a higher RPM manifold. If you're building that and you got some W head, W2 or whatever, W6, 7, 8, 9, whatever it is, some wild ported offset rocker thing, and it's a big motor, whatever the combination is, something you could take advantage of a single plane, then do that. But for a lot of people, the dual plane is the way to go. And so if you do a converted dual plane where you can run port injection, do we really get a benefit by doing that? Now, I like the idea only because, especially in applications like that, I mentioned the Magnum, or maybe a 360 Dodge, or 340 or 318, where it's an application that you don't have a lot of other choices. Like there's not a good fast manifold for a Mopar. That doesn't exist. So having other choices just by itself, just having another choice, whatever it is, good, bad, indifferent, whatever it is a good thing. It also got me thinking beyond that. Okay, yeah, it'd be nice to have that. It'd be nice to have a port injected one that we run a 4-hole throttle body or a single blade throttle body with a conversion, an adapter or something. That's all fine. But is that necessary? So that really got me thinking. Okay, if we assume that, like even on the Dodge, we can also look at a big block Chevy where a dual plane is a good idea. If we look at that and we see an application where a dual plane is a good idea, is port injection a good idea? So if we look at the other options for a dual plane manifold, we have a carburetor, which works very well. We saw that recently. Dulcich has shown that many, many times on his thing. So go check out Dulcich's YouTube videos and his channel and stuff and his social media, because Dulcich is an Engine Masters guy and he's awesome. He loves to test. He's like a real car guy. And so when we ran the airflow research heads on there, we ran it with a carbureted dual plane, and he had a spacer on it. And according to Dulcich, who's really a serious Mopar guy, he said, this is like the optimum induction system that you could put on one of these. He said, this is the way to go. And so that means for the vast majority of these kinds of Mopars. So we know that it works well, and we've seen it on small block Chevys and small block Fords. It's not a big surprise that an RPM air gap does well. It does well. Like I said, if you put a spacer on it, then we can shift it a little bit and play around with it. But the point is, if you have a dual plane intake manifold like that, and we have a converted one for port injection with a 4-hole throttle body on it that's just breathing air, or we have a carburetor, which we know works very well, or the other option is to have this 4-hole throttle body with the injectors in the 4-hole throttle body. If those are our options for an RPM air gap style manifold, which one of those would you choose? So maybe part of the reason that the port injected manifold on a dual plane doesn't exist is not because it doesn't work. We know that it does work. We know that it's possible. That's just nonsense. But the other option might be that it doesn't exist or is not very prevalent because of the competition. So how many guys would put that manifold on their combination, big block, small block, Dodge, Ford, Chevy, whatever it is, would put that on there and not put a carburetor on there, or not put a 4-hole throttle body on there if they were going to EFI? Because quite honestly, the carburetor or the 4-hole throttle body would both probably make more power than the port injection would. We've seen this, and I have videos up where we tested this. We tested it on an LS, but you test it on anything. And introducing the fuel, we know, into the intake manifold cools the charge, and it definitely adds power. So we see that if we just change injector positions and raise them higher in the thing, we know that because we've done it a lot. So we know that that's a thing. So it's hard to beat. It's hard to overcome that. The one thing, obviously, with port injection is we could do individual cylinder trims, which all manifolds are not ideal. Forget about the carburetor thing. The carburetor is not actually responsible for not having good distribution. That's almost 100% the manifold. The manifold design kind of dictates that. So no matter what we do, short of individually tuning each cylinder at every RPM range, because it's not the same. It's not like, okay, this cylinder needs 3% more fuel. Well, with a single plane manifold, sometimes it does at this RPM, and then it all of a sudden doesn't at another RPM. So it's not, I added 3% more fuel or 7% or whatever number somebody wants to throw at you in cylinder 7. Okay, cylinder 7 doesn't always want, like we do a sweep if we do an RPM sweep from 3,000 or off idle for some of the off idle guys to 6,500 RPM. It's going to want more fuel at some parts in that RPM range and not in other parts, because it becomes more and less efficient based on its runner length and intake design, and whether or not, and that dictates whether or not it needs more fuel. Sometimes it needs less fuel. So, but the nice thing about the port injection is we have the ability to tune that. So we can not just say, hey, I want 8% or 6% or 3% or whatever. I want 3% at 2,000 and 1%. And then, we can go in and do that. We can manually tune it. If we had 802 sensors, we could dial everything in perfectly. Testing has shown that doesn't change the power output a lot, but it does change the safety factor a lot. So that's good. But the question then becomes, if somebody's running a dual plane, like an RPM air gap, are they somebody that's going to do that? Are you going to pay to have that level of dyno testing done to where you're going to optimize it for each cylinder like that? How many people are going to do that versus how many people are just going to run a carburetor on there, or just run a 4-hole throttle body on there where you're injecting the fuel in, and then tune it with a wideband on one side or even two sides on two header sides where it's in the collector, and just tune it based off of that? How many people are going to do that? So as you can see is, okay, if we've gotten rid of the carbureted guys, we've gotten rid of the dual plane 4-hole injector throttle body thing, the carburetor replacement, electronic carburetor replacement, we got rid of those guys. All of a sudden, you could see now that the market for a dual plane with port injection now is shrinking. Now, it's going to shrink differently for different engine families. Now, maybe a big block, it would have more or less. The Dodge would have more, more or less. Small block Ford, there may be more of a reason to have it for some of those engine families. We could go into a long discussion on that, on on marketing and market share and all that stuff. But you could look at that and go, okay, maybe it would be more possible or profitable, or it might be a real thing for this engine family, but probably not for this one. And then we got rid of the carburetor, we got rid of the 4-hole throttle body. We also have to get rid of, because as a competitor to that would be single plane, both carbureted and 4-hole throttle body and port EFI, and get rid of that. So all of a sudden we have a very, very small market. So who wants to cast a manifold for a very small market? Again, individual people that are specializing in things like a Magnum or something like that would have to look at that and decide, oh yeah, that's worthwhile, or no, that's not worthwhile. Can we sell those? If you have an engine family that has no options, and that's the only option, that'd be a better option, especially for most of the low speed power up to 6,500, where most of this stuff is happening. That could be a good deal. But I can also now see, having evaluated it, why we don't see a flood of these in the marketplace, because guys that would be doing this and going to the level of tuning individual cylinders and stuff are probably more apt to put that on a combination that's making that's bigger, that has a bigger camshaft in it, that's making a lot more power. It's got aluminum heads. It's got all the other things. And then so now they're going to justify spending that kind of money and that time and effort. And they're going to probably do that with a single plate manifold. So let me know what you guys think. We'll throw a poll up here. Okay, should we see more converted or cast dual plane port EFI intakes on the market? Should that be a thing? You ain't got a thing if you ain't got that swing. Untrue, Jet, what's going on? Scottish. I'd love one for Restomod. What's up? That's the other thing, is that style manifold, whether you have a carburetor on or whatever, it allows you to run the carbureted style manifold, and you could, or the air cleaner and that kind of stuff. So you can make it look like even if it was EFI, you can kind of make it look like an old carbureted muscle car deal. Drag man, what's going on? I hate putting the low car LS3s that look like 396s together for customers. And they got single planes on it. I'd purchase them for customers for sure. Oh, if it was a dual plane, I agree. It'd be a better choice. I'm lost when you say dual plane EFI. Can you elaborate a little deeper as to what the difference is? Sorry if it's a dumb question. It's just a converted dual plane manifold. So it's a dual plane carbureted manifold, but then has injector bungs for each one of the ports. My blower manifold started out life as a dual plane Edelbrock. Here's my worthless 2 cents on the matter. Can a dual plane work with EFI? Yes, but it needs to be port injected TBI systems. The fuel distribution is always off. So is it, my question then, Chris, is it off with a carburetor too then? It's not the carburetor or the port injection or the throttle body injection doing that. It's the intake manifold. That makes sense, which is where I got confused with EFI part. Would have to go to one of those. TBI systems, the fuel distribution is always off. I don't know how the TBI could make the distribution off. That's a manifold design thing. And since dual planes have been working since, I don't know, for the last 50 or 60 years. We got a Honda K24 part today. Found rings collapsed on number 3 and 4, both top and second. All rings also collapsed. 1 and 2 had top ring collapsed and the second ring loose. All rings stuck. Were they running boost on it, it sounds like? My dad is a Silverado 2500 HD. He thinks a few injectors are going bad. I have a set of 45 or 50 pound injectors. They're flex fuel. Would he be able to run them? And if they would work, could he keep them? Yeah, but it's going to have to be retuned for that. Should we replace the pistons or just clean them in a sonic cleaner? I don't know. Then maybe I'm not understanding what you mean by rings collapsed. The rings don't have any tension in them? Because how are you measuring tension then? I'm curious about that. Usually when rings go bad, it's because they touched and broke a piston. I have an air gap dual plane with a Sniper 2 and a GT45 turbo on my AFR head of 350 Vortec boat. Oh, and a boat application too. Runs amazing. Yeah, as long as you can get the leanest cylinder rich enough, it works good. If these injectors work, I got it. I'll just let them keep them, save money. Currently looking at the MPVI3. I have an 8.1 with a dual plane, port injection, 4150 throttle body on the. Did you modify the Dart intake manifold, Amos, for port injection? I'll have to study the words dual plane to understand for myself. Did Dulce put a thermoquad on it? No, I asked him about that. But I asked him what carburetor we were going to use. He used a Holly on it. rank turbo superchargers and pro chargers on what you like from best to worst. If that's directed at me, you've been here long enough to already know the answer to that. And by the way, a pro charger is a supercharger. It's a type of supercharger. It's a centrifugal supercharger. So maybe you mean positive displacement superchargers? Want the port injection on a dual plane intake just for better fuel distribution? Yeah, we can. Yeah, we did talk about that. You can definitely make that happen as long as you can individually cylinder tune it, tune the snot out of it. Port injection with cylinder trim would be good. There isn't even distribution on a factory EFI truck manifold. And they're not, I don't think that they're doing individual cylinder trims on them. Richard, I'm wanting to build my Sierra 5.3, set it up for 1,000 horsepower, wanting to do your cam, whatever one you think would be better, and your turbo kit. Any idea how soon? I don't know when the turbo stuff will be ready. But any of the cams will easily get you to 1,000 horsepower. So you don't pick the cam for that. You pick the cam for how you want the thing to be, how responsive you want the thing to be, and how you want it to idle, and whether you want to use a stock converter and all that stuff. The power output's not a function of that. That's all the turbo. You have to sit out this poll. I don't want to skew the votes with my lack of knowledge. Well, you know what a single plane manifold is, right? You know what a dual plane manifold is? Like think RPM air gap and Victor Jr. If you can even look those up if you don't know what they are. That's a single plane. The Victor Jr. is a single plane, and an RPM air gap is a dual plane. Dual plane intake with MPFI and a fake carb might appeal to muscle car owners. Would the dual plane have the potential to increase fuel economy? Over what? Certainly over a single plane. It probably would be better than a single plane. I need 4 bunks per port so I can blend the fuel. Dustin, happy to help. K24 was the one that had 165 compression on 1, 2, 40 on number 3, and 50 on number 4. Code number 3 and 4. Rings stuck in the pistons. They won't move. Stock Honda CR-V. This happened after 9 hours of driving. That's not a ring problem. That's a tuning problem, right? Don't you think? And if the rings are stuck in the pistons, it's not because the rings are collapsed or not working. It's because somebody detonated that thing and crushed the ringland down. Took a dart and drilled it for injectors. Dart cast it so you could drill for injectors. Okay, they set it up for port injection, and I made a bracket to hold the stock GM injector rail. Dude, nice. I've run 5-tech on single and dual planes. No real difference on my Pontiacs. Do you mean that there's no difference between a single plane and a dual plane? I'm thinking you're talking about something else there. To a 3.5-hour ride on my Honda. Went to Home Depot to get some bolts. That's a long way to go to Home Depot. 3.5 hours. That's quite a bit. I need to get some of the black Gorilla tape. RPM and Torque 2 intake with a 5-tech that ran essentially the same. The Torque 2 used a load up on raised gas when 850. I've never run them on. If you're talking about a Pontiac, I obviously I haven't compared those two on a Pontiac. On every other engine family that I've ever run, an RPM air gap and a Torque 2 don't make the same power curves. But I have not tested one on a Pontiac. I've tested an RPM, but not a Torque 2. Should we see more converted or cast dual plane port EFI intake manifolds on the market? So it won't be carbon causing the rings to stay stuck in the pistons, or lack of maintenance. Has 195,000 miles on it. That usually happens to the oil rings. So the oil control rings can get stuck and not move. But usually you can put oil on them and or brake clean stuff, and then get them unseized, and they'll start moving around. You can check and see if the other rings will free up. But if there's not a bunch of buildup in there, it's because that channel where the ring is, one side of it now is tighter than the other side, or all the rest of the way around. I'd make sure that that's not the case, because that definitely can happen. Only a 5,800 RPM to play with on a 455. Really doesn't care what intake it has, as long as it feeds enough air. Yeah, I haven't ever seen that to be true. When we test them on 454 big blocks, or what any other engine family, a torque or two and an RPM air gap, because one of them is not a good single plane and one of them is a very good dual plane, that they do different things. And especially at lower RPM, I don't see how the torque or two could even be as good as a RPM air gap. TripFlow 11R top end kit for retro 5.0 sounds like new and old tech. Yeah, no, that's good. The 11Rs are really good. The ring's probably got gummed up with carbon or something. How's the tree fork coming along? It's coming along good. In fact, I cemented the posts in today, and we even all signed our names on it. It was good. I'm still waiting for two things to arrive. The Amazon things that I've ordered keep pushing me back. If they're not here tomorrow, I'm going to cancel the order and order something else. And then from Home Depot, I'm waiting for the slide. And then the final thing would be I have to take a trip to West Tech to weld up the elevator. We're sonic cleaning the pistons right now. Try to loosen up the rings. 2 passes and they're still stuck. Can you, Dragvan, can you see buildup in those? Does Truck Plus cam use different length push rods? No. But always measure when you're installing to make sure on your combination. We have had the last 6-liter that I took apart was kind of like that, where a couple of the rings were stuck, but the piston was not damaged. So we were able to free those up and spin them and get them working. The RPM only improves over a stock Q-jet with heavily ported heads. Torque or 2 is the same. I wonder why the RPM does better than the stock one with ported heads and not with stock heads. Got a shout out today from Matt at Moore. What is MORR? Putting an elevator on the tree fork. Yeah, it's so that otherwise I like have an external ladder on the outside so that I can climb up there fairly easily. But we want the little ones to be able to go up there. So that's where you're going to shoot the water guns. So they get to ride up the elevator. All around the pistons, we soak them in carburetor cleaner and they're still stuck. Can I send you a picture of the piston? Yeah, you can, but like we have to be fairly forceful with them. So oil, like I said, oil works good. Carburetor cleaner, brake cleaner we've used, and we have to force the rings, trying not to break them. We have to force them to move. $50 miles south of Mackinac. A buddy of mine used to go to Mackinac Island, I think was the name of it, right? Delete ski. Because the iron D ports only flow 140, 165 CFM. It's all about velocity. If the intake is bigger, it isn't going to flow more. Pull the very rusty 67 Firebird out of a pasture. Did it have a motor in it? Matt's off-road recovery shout out. Okay. Used to work on the Macatraz. By the time the dry air reached the injectors at the bottom of the intake port, the single plane TPI would be as happy as a dual plane TBI or carb. I don't really know what you're saying there. I thought by the time the dry air reached the injectors at the bottom of the intake port, the single plane TPI. How is the charge air going to be cooled with port injection on a single plane? I don't remember anybody stating that in any of the magazines. Australia is a Victor Jr. high-rise manifold good for a 5-liter that's been stroked to 347, trying to make 400 to 500. 400 to 500 is a really, really big spread. Our 5 liters are the same as the Fox bodies. Yeah, a Victor Jr. is not bad. That's a good choice. A Super Victor you can also get. I don't know what kind of heads you have. A 347 is fine. To make 500, you're going to need a really, really big camshaft in it and good heads. The rings are stuck so bad. The gap between the ends of the rings are hard to find. Did this motor sit for a long time? Firebird had a locked up 72 era Olds 350. Oh, that's weird. The dual plane work on multi-port fuel injection. Yeah, those exist. That's what we're talking about, though. But hydraulic throwout bearing in my 71 because the new 400 block doesn't have a spot for the pivot ball mount. Of course, it leaks like a sieve. Ever had piston cooling to an LS? Is it a viable way to tolerate increased compression? No. How hot is your oil? You'd be better off trying to cool the intake charge. Piston cooling is not designed for charge cooling. Piston cooling is designed for piston longevity. Is it true that if you want to change the camshaft, you also have to take the head to the machine shop and clean the valves? No, that's not true. Everything around here is older and rusted out, older than 15 years. I have alloy CNC DRP 185 heads that have been ported. Okay. I'm not familiar with those heads, but do they flow like 280 or something? I want to build a 408 stroker. With what engine family are you talking about, Weston? But Scat has good stuff. Summit Racing has good stuff. Just curious, wouldn't it be more efficient to cut down a single plane to get more efficient air movement? I don't know what you mean by cut down. An LS. Yeah, get the Summit Racing Pro LS stuff is good. Like I said, Scat has stuff. K1. There's lots of good choices out there. Might come down to what people currently have in stock. Right now we're at 77.23 on the yes side. 871 and ATM carb seem to work exceptionally well on a Pontiac. What's an ATM carb? Sat for a couple of months, but he drove it to Twin Falls twice and had the second trip. The next morning it ran bad and had the misfire code, towed it back, trying to fix it. They flew 500 horsepower at 450 lift. The dual plane to a single plane, cut it down for more efficient air movement. What are you cutting down? Why are you cutting stuff? Like, what are you cutting? We're only talking about putting injector ports, at every cylinder. A dual plane for a given RPM range is a better manifold than a single plane. Single plane's a high RPM manifold. Doesn't matter if you run it fuel injected or carbureted. A single plane wants to be more efficient at a higher engine speed than a dual plane. So if you're running this RPM range where you want to run a dual plane like up to 6,000 or 6,500, the dual plane is better. It's better carbureted. It's better throttle body, like where you inject like you have a 4-hole thing with has injectors in it. We're going to inject fuel into it like that. It's also better port injected because that doesn't change the manifold design. None of that stuff changes the manifold design. QTM is a company that builds custom carbs in Kentucky. They are awesome carbs. Okay. Yeah, I didn't see. It says ATM. That's why I didn't understand. And QTM I haven't heard of either. Talk about modifying a dual plane that's been done before. You lose low end torque and gain some top end. I don't know what people are talking about now, modifying the dual plane. If they're clean for an hour, rings are still stuck. RPM air gap has bosses that look like the machine for injectors. What manifold is that, Mike? What engine family? What is long-term EFI effect on engines? You can leave deposits, particularly in carburetors, particularly if you let that stuff sit. Mike, 8.2 small block Ford. Whose air is your RPM air gap from Edelbrock? And it has, or sure it doesn't have injector ports? I mean, does it have bungs for injector or nitrous, or does it have it for injectors? I don't remember seeing one from Edelbrock that had provisions for injectors. Doesn't seem like any dual plane could ever outperform the LSX intake manifold. Doesn't the LSX effectively behave like a single plane? It does not. In fact, it effectively behaves much more like a dual plane. But it combines the two because it has a more effective RPM range. It actually doesn't make as much low speed power as a dual plane carbureted manifold does. The fast LSXR intake manifold I'm talking about. But it doesn't perform like a single plane. If you go look at particularly the LS3 intake test, where we ran single planes, Victor Jr., Super Victor, and then Super Victor 4500, like a Dominator style, we ran those and compared those to fast manifolds, the stock LS3 manifold. The single planes make more peak power on that application. Not sure if I explained the flow of the heads correctly. Yeah. The engine will be running E85. The intake flow, have you already made 500 horsepower with it? That's why I was confused about what you were saying about it. Usually when you give somebody flow rates, it's CFM. And if it's ultra specific or detailed, it's flow at different valve lifts. %. Now I want to see. I I want to see the 8.1, the converted 8.1. That's kind of cool. Although I want to know if, I don't know if he's ever tested, because I haven't compared those two. I haven't compared the stock 8.1 intake manifold to the dark carbureted one, which I have. Amos, I don't think you've ever done a back-to-back test on those, right? Excuse me. Stock LS intakes are like a tunnel ram. Yeah, but even that's not accurate because we have actual tunnel rams for LSs, which is the high ram is a perfect example of that. And that's decidedly different than, it'd be more like a cross ram probably, because it has that kind of runner length. What about those 1970s EFI Cadillacs where the intake had no runner length or just a big plenum connected to all the cylinders? Throttle response and drivability were decent. Yep, just not as good as if they had runner length. Once injector bungs up high around the bottom of where the carb bolts on, so I can use the ethanol to cool the intake charge and then have to use TBI systems. Yep, you can get charge cooling that way, or just inject, you can do a water methanol thing or just methanol. I don't think there's a test of the stock versus the dart that I've seen. I should do that. The problem is that to do it, because we're converting it to, we either have to convert it to fuel injection and compare it that way, or we are comparing a carbureted deal to an EFI deal, which just introducing the fuel into that area and gets charge cooling obviously is going to help the carbureted thing. But that's, in its defense, that's what it was designed for. Look at those links. Both are 7521. Let's see. 7521 Edelbrock. Let's see. The 7521 Edelbrock does not have, well, the one that I'm looking at does not have any provisions for injection. It has bolt holes, but no provisions for injectors. I'm getting close to buying the adapter plate kit to put my new L94 on the Wagoneer. Nice. Ethanol on daily driver is a pain. I have the Porta one. You're welcome to a test. Well, Amos, you need to come out so that we can run your ProCharger deal on the dyno. Look at the link to the one on LMR. We don't see any links. Four seasons in one day. Fill 255-gallon drums and eat with E85 in Nebraska. That's good thinking. Got to plan ahead. Scrolling. Whenever you want to do the test on the ProCharger kit, let me know. I'll come out. Yeah, and then you could just take the 8.1 back with you and put it in something. I really kind of want to run it with one of our turbos on it. I left 2 more at the farm so I can fill them after I go to the HRE event. 1320 video ice cream cruise next month. I don't think it lets me post links. No, you can't post links. Cathedral port dual plane with both spread bore and 4150 patterns would be nice. Yeah, I don't know why they didn't do both of those, but honestly, I don't know very many people that would, LS guys that put quadrajets on there. Are you able to quickly search them up at all and explain them to me at flow rates? Just search DRP 185 heads. Let's see here. DRP aluminum heads. I don't see. Let's see. I'm looking. Total Performance Australia. 530 horsepower, 185 heads. Yes, we want to know what they flow. Let's see if it says what they flow. 2216. They flow 500 horsepower. I've never seen somebody advertise that before. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, they flow 260. So 256, they're saying equates to 530 horsepower, 256 CFM. 260 CFM, they're saying equates to 537. That's a really, really high specific output. But yeah, those are certainly capable of 500 horsepower. They flow enough. That's not a lot compared to what other heads that are out there, but that's enough. Run the 2.5 pulley, just waiting for a belt. Does some mixed form of port injection with throttle body injection exist to help cool charge? I think that Eric tried that at West Tech. Going back to Google search for Edelbrock. 7521 LMR. Okay, we'll look at that. Okay. LMR.com, Mustang Performance. Edelbrock 7521. The one I'm looking at from LMR does not have any provisions for port injection on it. They have bolt holes. They have injector bosses. I mean, not injector bosses. They have pads so that you can drill and tap to mount nitrous. But those are probably not, the pads that you're looking at are probably not injector bungs, though. That's probably for nitrous. That's not unusual. Lots of intakes have had that. So performance should be on. This is Richard Surfy runs it, no questions asked. That's has nothing to do with me. I don't know how to do all that. I've never tried to do that. Always being concerned about the airflow imbalance of dual plane when it's converted to MPI. Maybe it's not an issue. What are you concerned about the airflow imbalance just running a dual plane by itself with a carburetor or with throttle body injection? Because I don't know how you could be concerned about. I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying I don't know how you could be concerned about it with port EFI and not with a carburetor, because those manifolds have been run. You know, those were the manifold for OEM applications for decades. I remember the other night, I have a 6-liter with a Demuse kit around a 122. We finally made 5 psi with a 3.2-inch pulley, made 603 horsepower and 550 foot-pounds. That's nice. And with the 122, okay, that's good. Is that on an engine dyno? Gonna run the 2.5 pulley, just waiting for a belt. Okay. How do you use it? Sick Michigan miles. He sent me a thing he was with Steve Morris. 3 holes rusted clean through the exhaust manifold on the left side. 4. Exhaust manifolds are easy to find. Be awesome if someone made a multi-port fuel injection dual plane and map the trims per cylinder. I did this. Can't wait to get mine in the truck and drive it. Appreciate the help. Victor Jr. EFI Performer intake, a good intake for swap. The Victor Jr. And a Performer are 2 different intake manifolds. Two different intake manifolds. Anyone considering hydrogen conversion for a 351? Since fuel as we know it in some countries is a thing of the past. So you can't have gasoline anymore? In response to your answer, my concern is a variation in airflow in the manifold, but EFI injecting the same amount of fuel to every cylinder. But the nice thing about port injection is that we can alter the amount of fuel that goes to each individual cylinder if you have sequential injection. Up to 2035, and then there's no more gasoline. For what country is that? When I compare that image to the Victor Jr. with Bosses, I can see the pads on the RPM are too small. Yeah, it's like I said, they've had pads on lots and lots of manifolds, tunnel rams, and all kinds of stuff, so that you can drill and tap it for fogger nozzles for nitrous, which helps power a lot. Oh, Australia is wanting to do that. They're wanting to outlaw gasoline. I hadn't heard that. Should we see more converted or cast dual plane manifolds? Hydrogen is wildly expensive to make and use as transportation fuel. Doesn't dual plane require a specific firing order? Otherwise, if 2 cylinders fire sequentially from the same plane, what's the point? The intake manifolds are already made for all of these applications. So that's already taken care of. The intake manifolds already work. And you don't change the firing order. When you run a single plane or a dual plane, you don't change the firing order. I saw a video where they were getting nearly 2,000 horsepower out of a pretty much stock Nissan. Yeah, it's not pretty much stock. It's on engine dyno running water pump, alternator, power steering. Okay. $2,000 horsepower is a lot with a stock block. Aaron, what's going on? The LS doesn't like dual planes. They're like 4-7 and 5-2 swaps, if I remember right. So you think because of the firing order, they don't like dual planes? Again, the dyno says other things than that. We run lots of dual planes on there. Stock. Near. It's odd. Edelbrock made single plane port EFI, but not dual plane, but did do the one Hughes engine offer for the Magnums. Yeah, I wonder why Edelbrock themselves didn't want to do that, but then did do it when somebody commissioned them to do that. Looking at the Holly dual plane, 7 and 2 will fire from the same plane, one after the other. On LS, if you want to get crazy, something like an MS3 Pro lets you use 802 sensors and auto-tune 8 individual mounts for cylinder trims. Yeah, I've done individual cylinder trims before. How much fuel, if applied at a throttle body in addition to port ejection, would gain benefit from cooling? I don't know. I don't know what that number is. Never mind, I'm looking at it wrong. Thomas, all I can tell you is it works. All of the firing order and theory and all of that stuff is all stuff to talk about, I guess. But when you put it on the dyno and you put it in a car, it drives around and works just fine. I was able to get my turbo 6-liter to the track, ran 7.2 in the 8th. They kicked me off the track for going too fast without a cage. Had a great time. What mile an hour is it running in the 8th at a 7.2? Problems with TBI. Does it have to do a lot with transient fuel not reacting quick enough? I don't know why they couldn't get the tune reacting quick enough. Not sure, but it's a massive upgrade on the Magnum from the keg on a performance build. Yeah, I would think it would be. I mean, it's not too hard, I don't think, to be better than the kegger. Wrapping up my 331 build. Got to be on the dyno September, October. Nice. 2 horsepower per cubic inch. Unrealistic for a 351 in any trim. That's the easiest route to go down that road. No, it's just, I mean, it's hard because you have to have a lot of expensive stuff to do that. But if you have that, if you have the wherewithal, then, and you can do dry sump systems and shaft rockers and high compression and all the things that you have to do to make that work, then it can be done. Based on all the testing I reviewed, I'll be happy with anything over 400 horsepower. MS3 Pro Ultimate has more options. I have the best job in the world. What was I doing today? Oh, I was doing cement. I was doing essentially posts holes with they're the supports for the tree fort, and so I was cementing those. I think that's maybe the first time I've done that. 5.6 Coyote versus 5.506. Who has a 5.6 Coyote? 88 miles an hour for time travel. Yep. Thumper Wayne said it was a 4V, so it's a Cleveland. Right now it's 11:11. It's only 8:11 here, so you must be on the East Coast. Like a stock block 351, I'll be expensive to make 700 NA. Doable, but not cheap yet. When the tree fort is done, can you put on Airbnb? Airbnb, I think, is going away from what I've seen some reports on that. I don't know if it's true or not. But Bruno, one of the golden retrievers, basically has claimed the lower floor, and he doesn't want to let Brady come up the ramp, but he wants to come to the top. So that's why I need all the other reason I need to get the elevator in so that he can ride up to the top. Do you think a 347 would make 500? You have to. I don't remember what the camshaft was that you were putting in there. It's gonna have to be a really big camshaft because that's not a lot of airflow. If these are these Australian heads that you're talking about, it's a lot easier with heads that flow 300. It's a lot easier to get there because you're just having enough airflow to be able to make it, and so it makes it hard to do that. It means everything else has to be spot on. So to make 500, what did we have? We had trick flows or airflow research heads. Probably, I think we almost got there. No, it's like 475 or something like that with a dual plane on it. Ever tested Victor Senior? You mean an intake manifold? We've tested Super Victors. And if you're talking about 500 at the tire tough, it's not going to do that. Could one ship heads over from Australia to Morgan in the U.S. to be modded? If not, did Darren not design set of 4V style with 66? I don't know what Darren's done on Cleveland stuff. We got one more minute. Should we see more converter or cast dual plane port EFI intakes on the market? 79% are saying yes. Wayne, if you're in Australia, all you need to do is go get a set of CHI 3V heads, and you'll be able to do that. Of course, they offer D3 cylinder heads as upgrades for Windsors. Interesting channel I just came across from New Zealand. I own a 2001 VX Calais LS1. Nice. 292,000 kilometers on my clock. Love the 6-speed to replace the 4-speed. Did it come with the factory 4-speed, or are you talking about a 4-speed automatic? I'm going to have to figure out how to convert my E38 ECM to standalone. I'm sure lots of people have standalones. We just ran the LS on the Rebel, the Haltech Rebel, which worked good. I could buy those. Always dreamed of doing the stock stuff. 600 wheel horsepower. 600 wheel horsepower with a manual trans and it becomes easier with a manual trans and the right size tire and rear end and electric water pump and open exhaust. And you're kind of cheating it toward the engine dyno side, but it's possible. 4-speed automatic. Okay, yeah, a 6-speed would be is very, very cool. On that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow.